It was a moment no one would ever forget. No one could believe this man was sprinting straight through the lines of German soldiers defending the Belgian town of Foy in January 1945. Least of all the Germans themselves. In fact, they nearly forgot to shoot. It was only when they fired an 88mm artillery piece directly at him that he considered himself slightly impressed. At least they were finally trying. But not even the big guns could take down American Lieutenant Ronald Speirs. His reputation was already notorious among the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne. Since the blood-soaked days following D-Day, Speirs had become a myth and a nightmare. Some stories painted him as the perfect combat leader, fearless, decisive, and utterly committed to the mission. Other accounts described something much darker. Ronald Charles Speirs was born in 1920 in Edinburgh, Scotland. By the time he was 4, he and his family had crossed the Atlantic to settle in Boston. He wasn't one for conventional paths. He attended military training in high school and earned a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. When the U.S. entered World War II, Speirs volunteered for the Paratroopers. This brought him to the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, where he endured brutal training at Camp Toccoa, Georgia. By late 1943, the division was sent to England to prepare for the invasion of Normandy. After jumping into the dark skies of D-Day, he linked up with his men and quickly took charge of a small group storming Brecourt Manor. They captured a German howitzer and moved on. The night was spent repositioning, waiting for the fight to heat up. By dawn on June 7th, Speirs' platoon was ready to move out again. But before that, Speirs faced a decision that would cement his reputation and stoke rumors that persist to this day. The morning grew tense. Another small group of surrendering Germans appeared, and once again, Speirs' hand was allegedly forced. As the dust settled, a commotion erupted in his own ranks. A sergeant, drunk and belligerent, began shouting about charging forward, ignoring the order to hold position. Speirs confronted him, but the sergeant refused to back down. With a steady voice, Speirs ordered the man to get back to the rear. But the sergeant, fueled by alcohol and anger, reached for his rifle. Speirs had no choice. The sergeant leveled his weapon, and Speirs shot him in self-defense. The entire platoon witnessed the event in stunned silence. Speirs immediately reported the incident to Captain Gerard Gross, who deemed it justified. The legend of Speirs had begun, cold, fearless, and brutally decisive. His men feared him, admired him, and trusted him with their lives. As the beaches of Normandy began to cool, the 101st Airborne, still haunted by the ghosts of D-Day, prepared to push deeper into the heart of France. Just before dawn on June 11, 1944, Ronald Speirs stirred in the half-light beside the Douve River. He didn't feel rested. None of his platoon did. 6 days of combat had worn them thin. They had jumped into Normandy with only K-rations, and now they waited, bone-tired and strung tight. Speirs later recalled that the platoon had only 1 full night of sleep, and the men were physically and mentally affected. French resistance fighters showed up at command posts with tight grips on stolen Mausers, dropping off the latest intel. War correspondents sniffed around for stories. Some men joked that with all the captured horses corralled by the division, the airborne might soon become cavalry. But no one laughed at the graves registration tents. The fallen were wrapped in plain bags. Clerks combed through the pockets of boys who wouldn't make it home. Inside the camp perimeter, some men were already cracking. The tremors, the 1,000-yard stares, the silence. Speirs had seen it before. He said nothing. Later that day, Speirs moved northwest of Carentan, scanning the town with his field glasses. Below, The place was scorched and smoking. Civilians scrambled through the rubble, hauling water buckets to overwhelmed fire crews. But behind that chaos, something else stirred. Fallschirmjäger and SS Panzergrenadiers tightening the noose. The Germans defending Carentan weren't inexperienced. These were veterans from Italy and the Eastern Front. Fallschirmjäger Regiment 6 and elements of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division. The plan was straightforward on paper. Take Carentan and link up the Omaha and Utah beachheads. The order came directly from Eisenhower. The 101st Airborne would hit it from the north, while V Corps attacked from Isigny. But the marshes were flooded. Narrow causeways were covered by machine gun fire. German positions were dug in and overlapping. Speirs reported that neither battalion was able to advance, and both were taking very heavy casualties because of strong enemy resistance and good defensive positions. The flooded fields to either flank made it impossible to maneuver around the defenders. Their objective was to approach from the west of Carentan and seize the southern high ground, Hill 30. The terrain was nearly impassable. Speirs knew the hill would be worse than expected. He reviewed the enemy with cold precision, stating that they were well aware of the German paratroopers' fighting capabilities because they had defended Saint-Côme-du-Mont and Vierville in earlier fighting to the north. They attacked strongly when ordered and were armed with a high percentage of automatic weapons. Speirs didn't talk about courage or fear. He simply led, and Hill 30 was waiting. Fallschirmjäger troops, German paratroopers, stood apart from ordinary Wehrmacht units. Their camouflaged smocks and squat helmets gave them a distinctive silhouette on the battlefield, easily spotted by Speirs and his men. Speirs would later write that their morale seemed good, possibly because fighting the Americans was preferable to fighting both Russians and cold weather. That didn't put Speirs at ease, and he was just as concerned with the Wehrmacht's tanks. Only days earlier, outside Saint-Côme-du-Mont, Speirs's platoon froze as a German armored car emerged, guns blazing. One GI dropped instantly. Before they could react, the vehicle peeled off toward Carentan. Days later, spotting enemy armor near the town, Speirs felt the dread return. German armor was confirmed in the area. In comparison, his own platoon's firepower was weak. He had one light machine gun. Regardless, Speirs stated that riflemen were more valuable during the constant attacking in which they had been engaged. Their light machine guns during the Normandy campaign were not provided with the bipod, only a tripod, which was not satisfactory while attacking in hedgerow country. Worse than the treacherous terrain or the worn-out gear was the manpower. His force had dwindled to just 14 men, a shadow of a typical 40-strong platoon. Finally, after midnight, the 2nd Battalion moved out. Dog Company trailed at the rear, with men assigned carts and a single horse per company to haul ammunition. Lacking motorized transport, they had no choice. But it wasn't all bad. Horses were quieter, reducing the risk of alerting the enemy. Progress was slow. Headquarters Company bogged down almost immediately under the weight of mortars, machine guns, and bazookas. Fires burned in Carentan ahead, an orange glow rippling across flooded fields. Naval guns hammered the town ahead of their approach. The battalion moved off-road near a battered farmhouse. Speirs and his men slung their weapons and began hauling the heavy gear by hand. Broken fences, churned earth, and scattered debris filled the yards. Hours passed. The battalion staggered forward, blind and exhausted. Units lost contact with those ahead. Some men nodded off, standing up. Officers had to shake them awake. Enemy fire crackled in the distance, but resistance was scattered. At last, 3 hours after leaving camp, 1st Battalion reached Hill 30. The Germans had merely allowed them in, possibly laying a trap. Speirs deployed his men along the Beaupte road and scanned the countryside. Most could barely stay awake. The fatigue had consequences. In the dim light, a lone figure moved toward their line. No challenge, no signal. A trigger snapped. The man dropped. When they checked the body, horror set in. It was a 1st Battalion soldier. One of their own. It was a needless, friendly fire casualty. At 2:30 a.m., the battalion commanders met under a rubber raincoat to hide their flashlights from the Germans. There, beneath the coat, Speirs got his orders. The attack would begin at 6 a.m. They would drive straight into Carentan, house by house, street by street. And Speirs was ready. Just before sunrise on June 12th, the battlefield erupted. At approximately 4 a.m., leaders of the 506th were stunned to discover their regimental command post had, under the cover of night, mistakenly advanced well beyond its own front line. German machine gunners, lying in wait, quickly identified the exposed position and opened fire. Tracers ripped through the dark as headquarters personnel dove for cover. A full company was immediately dispatched to pull the command post out of the attack zone. The rescue effort unfolded under fire, with paratroopers exchanging bursts of carbine fire as they pushed toward the pinned HQ. With the element of surprise fading and time critical, 2nd Battalion committed to a direct thrust into Carentan. Rather than deploying cautiously through the hedgerows, the battalion moved straight down the main highway in a column of companies, Fox in the lead, followed by Easy and Dog. Fox Company hit the outskirts first. German defenders let them come within range, then unleashed mortars and automatic fire. Troopers sprinted for cover in ditches and hollows. Easy Company followed into the maelstrom and immediately came under heavy machine gun and 88mm artillery fire. Speirs watched the field ahead turn into a culling ground. Artillery had pinned them down for hours. Then they ran. Resistance, meanwhile, stiffened at the town's edge. A German machine gun in a cluster of houses pinned down the column. Speirs' men bounded into a neighboring building, scrambled upstairs, and fired a rifle grenade into the enemy's position. The explosion silenced it. Moments later, a .30 caliber machine gun was set up on the same floor and raked the street below. German infantry fleeing the scene were gunned down in waves. By 8:30 a.m., the worst was over. D Company pushed into Carentan as the last firefights sputtered out. The streets were cratered, buildings reduced to rubble, whole blocks burning. Carentan had fallen, but Ronald Speirs and the 506 weren't done. Orders came within hours. Move southwest. Seize Bopta. His platoon pushed west through heat and humidity, clearing a battered suburb. They expected resistance, maybe worse after reports of German strength nearby, but found only shattered homes and shaken civilians. Inside one wrecked house, Speirs encountered an elderly Frenchman, bruised from the bombardment. Speirs ordered him toward an aid station without delay. The man nodded, dazed. A reporter nearby had captured it plainly. The French had come through much suffering, and they knew that often Allied shells and bombs had caused it. But they said it was the price they paid for liberation. At dusk, Speirs' senior, Lieutenant Joseph McMillan, received the order to fall back to battalion headquarters under the cover of darkness. He and Speirs moved the company cautiously down a dirt road flanked by high hedgerows, the path barely wide enough for 2 men abreast. Visibility was poor, but they reached the main line without contact. Most of the men collapsed, finally allowed a few hours' rest. But McMillan and Speirs stayed alert, checking their sector one last time. Near the orchard, Speirs caught movement. He waved, then stopped cold. The last 2 figures turned. German helmets. McMillan took off instantly to give warning, sprinting across open fields and brush toward the stone house that housed the colonel's HQ. Gunfire cracked behind him. He hadn't made it in time. At headquarters, Easy Company was already engaging the enemy. Just then, 6 light tanks arrived. The tank crew let loose on the orchard with their machine guns. Flames lit the tree line. The German incursion had been blunted, but the line remained fragile. This wouldn't be the last push. Before first light on June 13th, Speirs' second platoon assembled for a direct assault on a farmstead below the Carentan rail line. The target was a stone-walled compound situated on a slight downslope, flanked by hedgerows and likely occupied by entrenched Germans. Speirs coordinated the advance with the battalion mortar section. At precisely 4 a.m., the 81mm tubes opened up. A torrent of high-explosive shells rained onto the farmhouse, breaking roof tiles and starting a fire inside. As the roof collapsed and smoke rose into the sky, Speirs gave the signal. His men moved down the slope in a skirmish line, rifles held low, checking their surroundings. They were 75 yards from the wall when everything changed. Shells suddenly came in from the west. German mortars and artillery, both 81mm and 105mm, slammed into the hillside behind them. The rear group was caught in the open. One rifleman was hit and left behind, screaming in pain. The others surged forward, jumping the waist-high stone wall into the smoking courtyard. Inside, things quickly got worse. The farmhouse was burning intensely, pushing thick black smoke into the yard that stung the men's eyes. Then, bursts of machine gun fire came from behind them. Germans had moved up the rear hedgerow, attempting to cut them off. Speirs spotted enemy figures running along the tree line and called to the bar team. The Browning fired rapidly, emptying magazines in seconds. Brass scattered across the stones as enemy cries pierced the smoke. The riflemen joined in with aimed fire, filling the courtyard with muzzle flashes and shouts. One man's M1 overheated so badly that he had to drop it, the stock slick with grease and sweat. Still, they held their ground. Grenades then started coming in. From the western hedgerow, German Eierhandgranaten flew into the yard. These small, lethal grenades bounced before exploding, sending shrapnel in every direction. The first exploded near the northern wall, spraying metal across the squad. A piece tore into Speirs' temple, and another hit his knee. He stumbled back, partly blinded and deafened by the blast. Private John Dielzy took a grenade to the chest. It bounced off and exploded near his hip, leaving him badly wounded on the ground. The assault followed. Fallschirmjäger advanced from the tree line just 25 yards away, firing as they moved. Speirs rallied his men. Behind the wall, they fired in unison. The bar let off long bursts, and every German fell before reaching the wall. The charge had failed, but the danger remained. The house was fully aflame, and they were nearly out of ammunition. Speirs saw that Dog and Fox companies were retreating. They were alone. There was no cover from grenades in the courtyard, and the heat and smoke from the burning house were overwhelming. Speirs looked for a way out. In the yard's corner, he saw a shallow drainage ditch running northeast toward friendly lines. He called out to his platoon and led the way. Men followed in 2s and 3s, crawling and sprinting. One tried to carry DLC, but was told to leave him, echoing the grim truth that nothing could be done. It was a painful decision, but the chance to escape was disappearing. They left him behind. Speirs was the last man into the ditch, bullets whizzing overhead and the cries of the wounded still audible. The platoon crawled through mud and reeds, covering 300 yards back to the regimental line. They emerged filthy, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. Speirs limped toward the command post, his knee aching, his face stained with dirt and blood. The fight wasn't over, but they had survived Bloody Gulch, for now. Speirs and his men dragged themselves through the muddy gully back to their lines. Their boots slipped in the wet soil, uniforms were soaked, and weapons clutched tightly. Once they reached their foxholes, they collapsed inside, drained and bruised. But as Speirs surveyed the area, he realized the situation was falling apart. F Company had pulled back again, this time to high ground 100 yards behind, with no orders or warning. The retreat had opened a large gap in the battalion's line. Speirs soon learned F Company had retreated due to an advancing German tank formation. D Company scrambled to close the breach. Within the lines, Speirs found his men shaken, crouched low, gripping the earth for safety, their eyes wide with fear of what was still coming. He later said they were frightened, but not in a panic. The Germans still controlled the flanking hedgerows, and covering fire had to be kept up, or the entire line would collapse. He moved through the trenches, shouting and pushing his men into action, forcing them to aim their rifles and reset their fields of fire. At 2 p.m., the ground began to rumble. Combat Command A of the 2nd Armored Division had arrived. 60 vehicles, including Sherman tanks, M5 light tanks, and self-propelled guns rolled in. The tanks opened fire while advancing, blasting apart hedgerows and wooded areas. German troops retreated in disarray. The route between Utah and Omaha remained open. Speirs's platoon was pulled back into Carentan and placed in reserve. Only 50 men in Dog Company were still fit to fight. Still, Speirs noted how resilient his men remained, saying many fought bravely, despite having to fall back. The battalion had defended Carentan, and both men and officers took pride in their effort. That night, they learned Private John DLC had survived. A German paratrooper had found him and bayoneted the wounded man, leaving him for dead. But DLC didn't die. He crawled toward American lines, bleeding and half-conscious, until medics found and evacuated him. Speirs never forgot what happened to DLC. The decision to leave him behind haunted him for the rest of his life. Speirs went on to serve in the Korean War, including Operation Tomahawk, in March 1951. After Korea, he worked as a liaison officer in East Germany. His final post was as a plans officer at the Pentagon, and he retired in 1964 as a lieutenant colonel. Over his career, he received several honors, including the Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. His remarkable role in World War II, especially during the Battle of Carentan and Bloody Gulch, was later portrayed in the 2001 series Band of Brothers,